Welcome, everybody. My name is Jason with Omega Collects, and I want to welcome you to another installment. And we're going to talk about comic book art. I'm going to give you a brief history about me, what brought me to comic book art, and then we're going to take that journey and just move forward with the channel in that direction. I will sprinkle in some comic book related things because I have started the road to a key again for that one book that I'm after, and I'm pretty much all set from a comic book aspect. And I'm also going to start down the road talking more about Omnibus. But right now, we're going to focus on comic book art. And so you're probably asking yourself, how did this come about, man? How did you get into comic book art? So I started collecting comics in the early 80s and became fascinated by various Marvel characters. For me at the time, when I had about $2 or $3, I immediately ran to a comic book shop and I started to buy Wolverine, Doctor Strange, X-Men, Fantastic Four, and some of the Marvel team up comic books because I really liked those books and the crossovers that they would do. At the time, the LCS owner, what he would do is he schooled me on the fundamentals of collecting comics to really focus on characters that you like, books that you like. And then also he schooled me on, hey, one day you should consider buying some of this art, save up your money when you get older. And at the time I was 12 years old and I was getting this education, but you may want to save up and buy some art down the road. So the influence was there for me to buy art, but I never really took it serious. Hey, I'm a little kid. I got $2 or $3. I'm going to buy some X-Men, Wolverine, whatever it was. I'm going to go get some popcorn from the caramel corn shop on the way home and be happy. And so, again, some of the influencers as well, when I was schooled, when I would read these comics, were people like John Romita Sr., Chris Claremont, Dave Cockrum, John Byrne, Bill Sienkiewicz. I noticed that I was drawn to their particular style of art, and it kind of, transcended me to have lots of thoughts and fascinations. As a kid, you play these fantasy games and you just sit and think about the what if scenario. So that's the type of kid I was. I was just always fascinated by newness, and so I left the hobby in the I left the hobby in the late 80s when I went off to college, 89. And I briefly got back in the late 90s. And I bought very few books. I mean, my stint back in the late 90s had to have lasted probably 2 months tops. And so then I completely left, started doing life. And then I returned to the hobby back in 2018. I pulled out some of my old boxes. I mean, I didn't know anything about long boxes, short boxes. I just had a box with some comics in them. And I started going through them, and it's like, hey, wonder what happened with this. Hey, this looks good. I remember this. Or, oh, I know I had the run for Secret Wars. Where's number 8? Because that's a popular one. I was told that back in the 80s that number 8 would be the book to have. And so that started me down my journey. And then the following week, I found myself in a comic book shop. And the crazy thing was, I walked in, I tell you, I was lost. I mean, I saw so many books, statues, action figures, cards, games, people playing. Now that I know they were playing all these Pokemon things in different rooms. So it was a totally different environment from when I truly left it in the late 80s. So again, I was lost. So I jumped in head first, like anyone else would do who hasn't been around. And I tried to pick up where I left off and I just started buying everything, which was, in essence, not a good move. But because of the knowledge that I had, I was actually buying key things and didn't know I was buying key comics that I later flipped for bigger books. But nevertheless, that was pretty much, short lived when I started buying books and I noticed it was getting out of control. So I completely stopped. So in 2019, I was going through some Instagram pages because I noticed that Instagram and you can get into this community and you start learning from the community. So I started going through some of these pages and I started seeing original comic art. And I remembered, hey, at some point you're going to have to start investing in this original art if that's your thing and you're going to go down that path. So, I started watching these channels and I started to subscribe to some of these channels, to stay up to date. And one of the things that I noticed was, hey, why not comic art? Why not? And so some of the things that I answered about that was, after years of collecting, I realized that in 2019, at the peak of 2020, that I pretty much achieved all my comic book goals. There were really no books that I wanted. And we'll talk about the golden age at a later point when I do the road to a key, but I really wasn't after anything. And then I learned that original comic art is one of a kind and was something that I liked. I liked that aspect of owning the only piece of original art from a comic in the world. And it's sitting either in my portfolio or on my wall displayed. And so that brought me closer to comic book art. I was also taught at a younger age, and I'm taking you back to when I told you the LCS owner in the 80s schooled me on, how to collect and how to invest. And he also schooled me on the same aspects with comic book art, which I really I was half-assed paying attention to be honest with you. But I realized that, I was taught that early on that art is a good investment. And so another thing I realized, hey, comic art is cool, man. It's cool to have some comic art. I mean, who doesn't want to showcase their art, have it on the wall, have some friends come over, or you're doing a channel like this, and somebody notices your art in the back, and they tell you, where in the world did you get that from? What is that? I mean, that's the cool factor, to sit there and explain that and say, yeah, that's a one of a kind piece. That's a page from whatever comic, from whatever artist, and it's published or unpublished or a commission that I got. So I don't want to jump forward, but that's pretty much the why comic art for me, and it sparked my interest. Now, to start this journey that we're going to go down, this is one video of many, many, many more that will come. I noticed that there's kind of a void on YouTube or out in the community to educate people on comic book art and what are the next steps when you've reached that peak of comic book collecting and what you should do. And so it brought me, my own personal interest in what I was taught brought me to the natural progression from comic books to comic book art. Now, to start off this, like I said, this journey, you need to understand what original comic book art is. And my interpretation is that original comic art is a unique, one-of-a-kind artwork created by comic book artists as part of the creation process of comic books, okay? It can be sketches, pencils, ink pages, painted pages, covers, color guides. I mean, you name it. It could be a host of things of what comic book art is. Then there's been a growing interest in comic book original art. Some of the reasons for this growing interest may be the bubble in the comic book collecting hobby. Sellers are opting to sell comics that don't reflect the actual market price. So, you've got, the market. The market is down. We're not realizing the same gains that we realized in comic books, let's say 2012, and as late as 2 years ago. So to me, those days are gone. And so what sellers are doing, they're selling comics that, and I want to be kind of careful because not all sellers are doing this, but I've seen sellers sell comic books that don't reflect the actual market price. I've realized too that GPA, GPA is good, but it doesn't reflect the market. It only reflects a subset of where the data is coming from. So to me, GPA is kind of not really, shouldn't be your 100% means of valuing your comic book collection or pricing your comic book collection for sale. There's other things that, you can realize almost a real time in selling, like eBay, the auction houses. Those can kind of give you a better perspective on how much a comic book is going for. And so since many copies of comics are supposedly rare comics and now are being discovered in bulk, people are finding comics in their attics, in their basements, in their storage sites, an inheritance. So when you think that the market is slim on certain books, you're wrong. I mean, look at Hawk 181. I mean, I ran through a couple of those but there's so many. And this is my perspective. Please, this just is me talking to you and things that I realize. But to me, the rare wow factor is not there for a Hawk 181 for me anymore. There's just so many. I can go pick up a Hawk 181 tomorrow. It's kind of like you can trip over those things. And so the rarity factor in comic books is kind of, to me, isn't bankable. And the value of the comic book, original comic book art in itself, there's value there from, again, that one of a kind factor. So another aspect is general art collectors find it more approachable than collecting entire books. Just getting the original artwork is a gateway into a larger world of comic book collecting. Trust me, when you start holding these pieces of art in your hand, the appeal is like, wow, I can't believe I own this cover or this splash page or this double page spread. I mean, to me, owning that is just the ultimate wow factor. And again, there's also an appeal when you have your art displayed. Like I said earlier, you may have some friends over or family or doing a podcast or streaming live, and the art catches someone's attention. There's nothing greater than explaining what the piece is and how you got the piece and where you got the piece from. And so, art can be displayed for fun and that people will like. And so, in a nutshell, like I was telling you, we're going to go down this journey. I'm going to dive deeper into comic book art and from a beginner aspect because, hey, I'm still a beginner. I just jumped into this in 2020 and I did a lot of research before I bought my first piece in 2020. So I'm looking forward to going down this path, hopefully filling a small void in the YouTube world so that people can come and understand what comic book art is, how to do your research, how to price things. There's a whole gambit of information that I'm going to provide. I'll even do unboxings when I get some comic book art. I'll display some of the pieces that I have, talk about some of the artists. Hopefully, we'll get into interviews of people in the community who do collect the comic book art. And hopefully, I can bring some of these artists on who can talk about the process, things they're working on, and some of the art reps, because there is one particular art rep, actually many, but there's one particular art rep who really took his time to educate me about the world of comic book art. And, he helped me identify my taste and what I'm actually after. So I want to thank you for tuning in. Like I said, I'm looking forward to moving down this path with you. Please subscribe to my channel so that you're aware when I do put out new content. But thanks for tuning in, and I'm looking forward to talking to you in my next video.